County Board. Mr. Kalish, please call the roll.
Carroll,
Here.
Murphy Lopez,
Here.
Van Landuit,
Here.
Seed, McKee,
Here.
Brewer,
Here.
Luck,
Here.
Manning,
Here.
Glassbringer,
Here.
Rudersdorf,
Here. Here.
Prentice,
Here.
Burt,
Here.
Frank,
Here.
Severson,
Present.
Williamson,
Here.
Sweet,
Here.
Nelson. Thank you. Nelson, Paul,
Here.
and McGuire.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you.
Asgrove's here.
Thank you.
For your information, those of you on WebEx, there are 8 board members here in the training room with me, so good for them. And Mr. Kalish, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Yep.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I noticed some of you standing up on your cameras, so that's good. Very good. We know you're not in your pajamas that way. Okay, we have a very, very short agenda tonight. It should be over in 5-10 minutes, maybe. There's 5-point agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda. So moved, Dan.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second here in the room.
By who?
Dan and Lee. All right, we have a motion and a second on approving the agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. The ayes have it. We have an agenda. Number 4. A resolution adopting changes in the county board rules, management policy, and committee structure. Mr. Kalish.
This will be resolution number 22-33. Now therefore be it resolved by the Richland County Board of Supervisors that the proposed.
I can't hear Kalish.
This will be resolution number 22-33. Now therefore be it resolved by the Richland County Board of Supervisors that the proposed amendments to the rules of the county board, management policy, and committee structure document are hereby adopted, and changes to operations and structure will be implemented through administration in the preparation for the 2022 to 2024 county board session. Be it further resolved that these changes shall be made available to the administrator/county clerk office, and that a copy of these documents shall be published on the Richland County website. And be it further resolved that this resolution shall be effective immediately upon its passage and publication. And this resolution is being offered to you by the Rules and Resolutions Committee.
Thank you for that reading. You've heard the resolution. What's your pleasure?
This is Turk. I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Turk, seconded by Mr. Frank. All those, well, let's discuss things here before we.
Please don't do that tonight.
Good luck.
Anyway, because I'm the chairman, I do have a certain amount of latitude as chairman, and we're going to treat this. We're not going to stand so much on decorum tonight as to have a good discussion here tonight. We'll treat this as almost a committee of the whole. So let's get on with it. And who from the committee that wrote these changes would like to lead us through it? Sean?
Mr. Chair, as
Yes.
chair of the Rules and Resolutions Committee,
Yes.
I'd be happy to walk through most of it. However, I did ask Supervisor Luck if she could walk through part of it. She helped with a new portion of it that the Rules and Resolutions Committee did, but based on some feedback from the committee at our last meeting, we did add a section I guess I'd just encourage the other 3 committee members, Mr. Severson, Mr. Cosgrove, and Mr. C, if he jumps on to jump in at any point in the presentation. And then also folks have questions, and if it's not, if it's preventing you from being able to digest other things because your question's out there, of course, ask those. It might be answered in the presentation, but we know you'll have questions as well. We've had a lot of questions as we've been working on this in the past 6 months, and it's really the culmination of let's see, I think it's been 8 meetings. They varied anywhere between 1 hour and 45 minutes and 3 hours. We spent a lot of time on considering a lot of things for the next term, and this resolution was brought to the county board, not for the county board to decide what they want to do with this, whether it's to pass it, to vote it down, or to postpone it, or what have you. So that's a little bit of the context. If I'm not sure if
no, I'm trying to follow along with the PDF file. So if you could tell us which one of those you're on, then we can easily switch to it on our machines.
Sure. So it would be 04D as in dog.
Thank you.
Presentation.
D. All right, got it. Thank you. All right, proceed.
And
Proceed.
Okay, so yeah, it looks like Clint has got the document up there as well on the screen for folks on WebEx. I don't know if you all can see it in the room there.
Yeah.
Okay, so our work on all the changes that we're bringing forward to you today started in October, so 6 months ago. At that meeting, we had a proposal by Mr. Langrek to basically restructure how our committees were organized, and especially how our committees were appointed. That was, I think, the big thing. He brought a proposal to have the county board chair appoint 3 members of the 5-member committee on committees. It's 7 members right now, so he was proposing to reduce it by 2 and keep the vice chair of the county board on it as well. He also was working on categorizing all the different bodies of the county board into standing committees, boards, commissions, subcommittees, and seats on partner organizations. And then I'm looking at my document here since I can't quite see under the little icon there, but also having the county board chair appoint the standing committee chairs. So say a standing committee would be like Pine Valley Board of Trustees or the Highway Committee. His proposal was to have the county board chair appoint whoever was going to chair each one of those groups. And the main justification that we discussed at the meeting that he brought forward was to ease the streamlining of county services through the establishment of almost like a cabinet of the county board chair. And at that meeting, we discussed it. You can see in the link below for a little over an hour. And the action that we took was to forward an informational proposal to the county board to get feedback. And folks might remember this was at our budget meeting at the end of October. It was at the end of the meeting. And so in November, we reviewed the feedback we did get. I'd say from at least a handful of people that I heard from directly, and other committee members may have heard from others. But the main feedback is that it seemed less democratic to have the county board chair appointing the chairs of various committees. We talked more at this meeting in pretty good depth, and we had a lot of healthy discussion. I rewatched all these meetings just to refresh my memory. And we talked a little bit more about what Mr. Langrek's idea was to create more cohesion, to lead us through challenging finances that all of us have been talking about for several years now. And then also to allow committees to be appointed at the organizational meeting, which is that first meeting after the election in April. And currently it happens in May. That's how the county board has done it. So to create more efficiency. We did have some feedback on, there was interest from some of the committee to have the county board chair and vice chair candidates submit resumes before their election. I think it should say, it says selection. So our informal action at the end of that November meeting was to research how other counties were appointing their committee members to follow up on Mr. Langrecht's proposal. We didn't take any big action at that meeting. Just a lot of good discussion. In December, we began discussing the process for running for a county board chair and vice chair to follow up on that November meeting. We also talked with Mr. Langrecht about orientation for the new term for county board members. And then also he created an interest form for the different bodies of the county board. And we looked at that. We took quite a few actions at this December meeting. One was to encourage county board members to attend. There were a series of educational webinars that the Counties Association was giving, and you can see what the bullet points say there. But one of them, the top one, was about committee structure and right sizing, is what they called it. And then we also took action to research how different committees of the county board are paying departmental bills and monitoring annual spending. And then we reviewed research on how those other counties appoint county board members. And then we recommended these 4 points below. We recommended first that the county board chair appoint supervisor members to bodies of the county board with confirmation of the county board. We recommended it happen at the organizational meeting and not in May, a month later. We recommended that the county board chair may remove supervisor members from committees with county board confirmation with the option of resignation before removal. And then we also recommended that committee chairs should be elected by committee members and not appointed by the county board chair. So how we got to all this information, or those 4 decisions right there, was we reviewed. On the next slide, you can see about 10 different counties that have a similar population to ours and an administrator form of government. So Richland County is kind of in the middle of the pack there. And then on the next slide, so the first thing I just read through in that last bullet, last set of 4 bullet points, the county board chair in these other counties usually appoints members to different committees. Iowa County was the only one that had something like we have, which they called a committee on appointments, and it was quite a bit smaller. So we were definitely out of the norm for having an administrator doing it the way we do it. The second bullet point about when different counties are making those appointments, about half were doing it at the organizational meeting and about half in May. So based on that, we decided we think it could be accomplished at the organizational meeting. Then the third one, these different counties, and you can see the answers, you know, if you want to zoom in on how each county does this, but there was quite a bit of variability with how members are removed from different committees. We heard from the Counties Association that you really should have this in writing so that when hard situations come up, that it's clear how someone gets removed from a committee. And this is not being removed from the county board. That's governed by state law, and we have a whole county board rule about that. This is just about committees. How does someone get removed from a committee? Something that doesn't happen very often, but it pops up occasionally. And then the 4th bullet point, this was the one where we did not take the recommendation from Mr. Langrecht. We decided to go with what most counties do, which is allowing those committees or sub bodies to elect their own committee chairs. So that's how we got to that. And then in January, we took the following actions. We decided that we'd like to recommend to the county board that sub bodies or committees monitor the actual versus approved annual budget and funds managed by their departments on a minimum quarterly basis. You can see where we discussed that in that meeting. So right now, and we'll go to, I'll skip my comment on that till we get to the next slide. The next thing we recommended at this meeting was to develop a list of required and optional responsibilities for the chair and vice chair. We don't really have a job description currently for those two roles. So we just said we should probably come up with a list and make some decisions and forward those to the county board. The third bullet point here, we recommended a 7-step process for running for county board chair and vice chair, since it's not really well defined right now. And then the last thing, probably the biggest thing that really probably piqued a lot of your interests in what the rules committee was doing, was we recommended in January to draft options for restructuring committees to improve efficiency and accountability. So basically we picked back up that October proposal that Clint brought to us, and we watched a portion of the Wisconsin Counties Association webinar on committee structure and right sizing. We actually watched that in the meeting, portions of it, and that's when we made that decision to draft some options. So I mentioned that first bullet point on the last slide. There's a chart on the next slide that says what are the current financial practices of our different committees. And most of them you can see in green in that second column. Most committees are approving monthly bills, but most, if you go to the fourth column, most committees are not actually monitoring the annual budget of their departments. So that was why we were recommending that change and that get drafted into the rules of the county board so that there's some more financial oversight. On the next slide, I'd mentioned that process for running for county board chair and vice chair. I'm just going to briefly try to summarize each one of these bullet points because I think they are important for us to consider, as we're thinking through all this, whether we want to make these changes or not. The first thing, right after the election, when new county board members get elected, is that everyone would receive our policy, which is called, it's kind of wordy, but authority of management, roles of members, and chairs of committees, boards, and commissions. And that we have as one of our attached documents. You don't have to go to it right now. We'll go through those on a separate slide, but we've actually detailed out what we want to recommend as the roles for the chair and the vice chair of the county board. So everyone would get that. So basically everyone would see what's the job description for the chair and the vice chair from the get-go, right after the election. And then the second point here is candidates are strongly encouraged to indicate their interest on basically it's a survey form for which committees you want to serve on. There's another checkbox that Mr. Langrick has created asking people if they're interested in becoming chair or vice chair of the whole county board. And then on that form, there's also some biography questions for every county board member to answer that he's been creating for us. And 2 additional questions would be on here for the chair and the vice chair candidates. And that would be, if you are elected, are there things you would try to change or do differently? And the second is, how would you describe the style you will use working with your fellow supervisors, committees, administrator, and other staff? So then the fourth step is that all these completed forms would be distributed to everyone in advance of the organizational meeting. So we could see, what do all 21 people, what committees do they want to be on, and how they answer the biography, and who's interested in being chair and vice chair, and how did they answer those questions. So the fifth step, candidates for chair and vice chair may directly contact county board members to campaign for the positions. We actually reconsidered that, but it was the step we did approve this particular month. And then the county clerk shall run the organizational meeting. We don't have that spelled out anywhere. It's typically how it's been done in the past, but until that chair is elected. And then nominations shall be made and seconded after the election, and the election of the chair and vice chair should follow the already defined format in our board rules, which is pretty simple. It's a secret ballot, and you write down your preference, and it has to be a majority of those present. So that was the process that we recommended at January meeting. And then in February, we picked back up. We were juggling a lot of balls in the air, you can tell, as we were going through all this in this package that we're bringing to you tonight. In February, at the February 3rd meeting, we looked at 3 restructuring options for committees, and we decided to further develop a hybrid of 2 of the 3 options. We called them option A, B, and C, and we were looking at developing a hybrid of B and C. So why were we doing this? Supervisor Luck, she did a lot of research on this and found that we had 54 bodies that the county either runs or participates in. Sometimes they're called. Yep.
Trying to interrupt you.
Sure.
Still on the last display here. There you go. Thank you. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, feel free to interrupt me. Especially if I fade away and you can't hear me, let me know. Hopefully my internet's working well tonight. So we have a lot of things we are involved in. The advantages of this, and there are of course disadvantages too, and we debated those quite a bit in the Rules Committee. But one of the advantages would be that fewer meetings would encourage a shift in this focus that we've been working on the past 2 years, from day-to-day management of staff, where county board members are managing staff, to developing policy. And policy is kind of a vague word that gets thrown out sometimes, but I think what we're thinking is, what are we doing and why are we doing it? Not getting into the how and the who and the where as much. It would also give us the ability to attend more meetings, so that we're better informed as county board members. It'd probably give the administrator that ability too, to go to more of them. The presentation that we watched on committee structure and right sizing, the administrators from La Crosse and Ozaukee counties came, and they talked about increased accountability, and how that was a big benefit for them when they made this change. I think it was about 15 or 20 years ago. And there's a lot of counties that have made the change, but those were the 2 that gave the presentation. And then we also learned from the WCA lawyer that state law gives counties a lot of freedom on how we structure. There's actually what's called, he referred to it as a freedom statute, but there are a lot of parameters that we need to work within too. And a lot of folks are probably familiar with some of those, and I'm sure you'll have questions about some of those tonight. Then we met twice in February. We don't usually do this, but because of all this stuff, we decided to meet a little more. So on the 17th, we spent over an hour and a half looking through all of the responsibilities that county board chairs have in a lot of those peer counties that we looked at before. So we went through each topic one by one, and we made recommendations that are here for you tonight. The first is to talk about the agenda and kind of spell that out. How does the agenda for county board meetings get put together? What's the county board chair's role in that? I'll skip to the third one, acting as a voting member on different committees if a quorum's not otherwise present. For a standing committee, we decided to recommend that. A fourth one, this actually comes from state statute, and statute gives the option for counties to give this responsibility to their chair if they care to do that. And that's to take care that all federal, state, local laws, rules, regulations, and board policies pertaining to county government are enforced. And pertaining to county government are the key words in that phrase, because of course we don't expect a county board chair to enforce federal laws that have nothing to do with us. The fifth one here, such other powers and duties as are set forth in county ordinances or resolutions. The sixth one, assign all matters to the appropriate committee when there's doubt. Currently we say assign all ordinances and resolutions, but sometimes there's not a resolution at hand, it's just a topic. The next one is to represent the county at legislative hearings, conventions, and to also be able to delegate those to other people. A lot of that, of course, already happens. We know that Chair Brewer does that currently, and I think it's just basically writing it down and laying out the expectation. The third one from the bottom is to act as the chief elected spokesperson and to coordinate with the administrator, who is the chief administrative spokesperson for the county. The second to the last one is to remove appointed committee members with approval by majority of the county board. And then the last one is to start allowing the county board chair to call for votes, including abstentions. So going to the next one, this is a slide that I went through in a pretty good amount of detail already, but we made a couple changes. We heard in one of those WCA webinars that someone from another county had a question about this process of campaigning that's often used in counties for the chair and the vice chair roles. And the lawyer recommended, and we also heard from our corporation counsel, he agreed with this assessment, that it's a potential open meetings law violation to have the county board talking about more than a quorum, talking about who should be the next chair or the vice chair, and not doing that in an open meeting. So we actually changed our recommendation from previously. You can see that not is highlighted in red now. Candidates for county board chair and vice chair may not directly contact county board members to campaign. And then we made a corresponding change in point 7 to allow each candidate 10 minutes to speak and answer questions to basically campaign at the organizational meeting. So then on February 17th, back to the committee structuring topic, there's a chart on the next slide. And you might remember I mentioned that we recommended developing a hybrid of 2 different options, and we didn't show the charts in this presentation from before, but you can go see those charts in all of our meeting materials on your iPads or on our website. But we adopted a framework, and we looked at, I have to read here what we did, so I'm forgetting now. We adopted this framework right here. This was a combination of option B and option C, and so we started calling this option D. And the idea was to have one executive committee, basically combining all of the different committees that we have right now that deal administratively with the county. So that would include finance and personnel, rules, strategic planning, all in an executive committee. And then to have 4 different standing committees: HHS, which would include several other departments that you can see listed out here, 4 other departments; public safety, which would LEJC, Law Enforcement and Judicial Committee, already has all of these except emergency management; natural resources, that would combine several different departments; and then public works and infrastructure, which would combine several departments. So after that meeting, we did adopt this as a framework, but we started to hear different feedback and questions that started to lead to maybe this isn't the consensus that we need. Maybe we need to relook at this this option that we developed. So if you go to the next slide, you can see the feedback that we heard. We've got 5 bullet points here. We heard from Supervisors Gentis and Chair Brewer that the UW-Platteville-Richland Committee needs more focus on education and culture. And it was lumped into that Public Works and Infrastructure standing committee before. And we heard from one of our committee members, Mr. Severson, that the Fair and the Parks committees are sources of labor for both departments, and keeping citizens and county board members on the same committee is needed for now, until and if things change there. Mr. Severson's brought up concern about the length of meetings. We did hear about that from both administrators in those other counties. We heard that from a lot of other counties who are looking at this. And they said in those counties that they really changed their focus. They didn't get into so much of the weeds as they used to. And so their meetings did get shorter, and they got more focused on bigger issues instead of little issues. but still, as we make this transition, thinking about going from about 18 committees to 5, I think the length of the meetings, it seemed like a valid concern. Also concern about not enough time for department head oversight. We heard that from Mr. Seep. And then the executive committee having too much on its plate. We heard that from a couple other committee members, Supervisor Luck and Supervisor Severson. So this is how we addressed each one of those. At our next meeting, we created an education standing committee, and we added language about promotion and education to the UW Richland aspect of that education standing committee. With the fair and the parks, we kept both bodies intact, and then we combined them, adding language about creating a sustainable plan, especially as it regards labor with both of those departments. The length of the meetings, we actually increased the number of standing committees, so we decreased it quite a bit from 18 to 5, and then we went back up to 9. And then we reduced the number of department heads reporting to each standing committee in response to Mr. Seep's concern. And then we created 2 executive-like standing committees. So we split finance and personnel out from rules and strategic planning, basically combining the current committee that's bringing forward your proposal tonight and then strategic planning. So the chart on the next page shows option, I think we ended up calling this one E, because we were on our 5th option by this point. And this is the one that was approved for bringing forward to the county board from the rules committee. So the finance and personnel committee, that would take on the role of audit committee, and it would keep the administrator under that committee and handle budget issues. And then rules and strategic planning would handle basically everything that those 2 committees are currently handling. And then you have the 7 standing committees below that. Pine Valley and child support. We got a lot of feedback from several of us and department heads that they didn't make a lot of sense together, but we kind of were in this situation because we did think it made sense to combine HHS and veterans. And so those could have been mixed and matched in different ways, but I think combining veterans with HHS, there was pretty widespread support for amongst our committee. And then the public safety standing committee would still add emergency management. The education standing committee would have ag and extension, UW Platteville Richland, and UW food service. So basically combining 2 current committees into one. Public works would have property, highway, and MIS. So basically taking MIS away from finance and personnel where it currently is and moving it somewhere else. And then land and zoning would combine 2 committees, the Land Conservation Committee and the Zoning Committee, into one, and then also move Register of Deeds from Finance and Personnel to that committee. And then Fair, Recycling, and Parks, that would be combining the Fair and Recycling and Parks departments. So just to highlight some significant changes that aren't really shown in the chart, but that we just don't want to get lost in the weeds if you haven't been able to read through all the rule changes or the committee structure changes. One significant change would be to have the board chair be the chair of Finance and Personnel Standing Committee. So currently it can be anyone. The chair and the vice chair of the county board are automatic members of the Finance and Personnel Committee, but the change here would be that the board chair would be the chair of that committee. The second big change would be to have the board vice chair then be the chair of rules and strategic planning, to split those responsibilities up and to give more responsibility to the vice chair, which that role doesn't currently have a lot of responsibility except for filling in for the chair. A big change would be eliminating the committee on committees. It's currently a 7-member group that's elected by the county board. And that would be gone basically because the county board chair would be appointing members of different committees, with one exception, with Pine Valley, because state statute requires that be elected by the county board. The fourth one is to make the highway committee, the public works standing committee, appointed and confirmed by the county board rather than elected. And Wisconsin statute gives counties the freedom to decide if they want the county board to elect those members of the highway committee, or if they want to do any other way of appointment, which includes county board chair appointing And then I mentioned this last one already, but we kind of drew a line in the sand to try to figure out how to divide responsibilities between the board chair and the administrator. And we're recommending in these changes tonight that the county board chair appoints county board members to bodies, and the administrator recommends appointments of citizens to bodies. And they would have to collaborate in that process. And Melissa will help us go through some of that later tonight to show how that would work. Other significant changes, we had a lot of questions about like ambulance, not as many about economic development and Simons, but we've been talking a lot about economic development obviously lately with the Red Board. But those are basically joint bodies of Richland County government and usually the city of Richland Center, in the case of the ambulance, quite a few different townships and villages in the city. So those would remain independent. The only difference here is that they would report to one of two executive-like committees. So either to finance and personnel or to rules and strategic planning. And then the chair and the vice chair, the way it's written currently and the proposals before you tonight is that they would serve on the joint ambulance committee. That's currently not written that way in our current committee structure document. The third bullet point, advisory and special appointment bodies would report to standing committees when necessary or desired. And I believe we have a chart that shows you what are the standing committees, what are the advisory committees, and what are the special appointment bodies. And I'm sure a lot of you are going to be interested in those because a lot of us do serve on these different advisory and special appointment bodies. We've consolidated from 18 to 9 standing committees. Mentioned that before. We've removed 8 defunct or unnecessary bodies. We've added 4 that were already meeting but were not in our structure document. And we also drafted a process for making appointments at the organizational meeting in April instead of waiting till May. It's somewhat complicated, and that was part of the we had to work on. The next slide just shows what a draft appointment process would look like. I'm not going to go through that one because I think it's easier to look at this visually. And I'll hand it off to Supervisor Luck here so she can explain how we came up with this creative process to meet all the recommendations that we're bringing forward.
All right, so Clint, you can go to the next slide. We're going to start there. So obviously everyone has been, and we are, and I mean, we are included in that, are trying to figure out exactly how we would go about doing this in one meeting without it being a really long and complicated meeting. And I think it actually is possible the way we've got it laid out right now. So on the night of our organizational meeting, we would have agendas set for all of the standing committees. Well, I should say the non-executive standing committees. So there would be an HHS and veterans meeting. There would be a Pine Valley, Public Works, Education, Land and Zoning, Fair Recycling, and Public Works. So how this would work is the county board chair would designate who is on the first standing committee, which in this example is HHS and veterans. So if you go to the next slide, you can see that we have now placed, and we decided to start using names of our current board members just because I felt like it was easier to actually visualize how this works. So, and we just drew names from people who are currently on. It's pretty random. This by no means doesn't mean anything. It was just, we picked names. So in this case, we chose Carrie, Ingrid, Tim, Van, Don, and Lee to be the supervisor members of HHS and veterans. So you can see in the chart at the bottom there, for Carrie, Ingrid, Tim, Van, their standing committee A says HHS and veterans. So then that committee would meet and they would elect a chair. Now, our assumption is that it would be the supervisor members of that board voting for chair because we don't know what citizens, if any, would be present at this meeting. So that is still a question that we probably need to talk a little bit more about, but for sake of just running through this process right now, let's just assume that the supervisor members are the ones that are voting for the chair. So they elect Carrie. So that means that Carrie is the first supervisor member of the finance and personnel and the rules and strategic planning, because the first two seats are already filled by our chair and vice chair on those two committees. So then they would adjourn their meeting, and we would come back into the main meeting, and the chair would designate the Pine Valley and Child Support Committee. And in this case, it's Richard, Peg, Marty, Don, Linda, Dan, and that's a citizen. So, and they would then meet and they would elect a chair. And in this case, it's Richard. So Richard gets moved over to Finance and Personnel and Rules and Strategic Planning. And you can see that we've added their names down below. And in the first column, we've added that so Richard, for example, is now on Finance and Personnel and Rules. And so that means that he can no longer be on any other committees if we stick to the plan of each person equally getting 3 committees. That's something I probably should have stated up front. So our goal was to have everyone have the same number of committees so that the work is equally spread out. And we don't have some supervisors having 7 committees and some supervisors only having 2 or 3. So, all right, so if you move to the next one, so that meeting, so Pine Valley would adjourn and we would go back into the regular board meeting, and then the Public Safety Committee would be seated and they would have their meeting and they would elect a chair. And in this case, it was me. So then I get moved over to Finance and Personnel and Rules. And so now I also am done with any committees assignments. So as you can see, so we're filling in this chart down below. Each person gets 3 committees. So if you go to the next slide where it's Education Committee, now here's the first place where we're going to run. Oops, what's happening? Okay, Education. So in this case, we've appointed Linda, Chad, Bob, Tim, Lee, Mark, Steve, and Van. And they meet and they elect Linda. Now you'll see that Linda was already assigned to the Pine Valley Committee, Standing Committee earlier, but by accepting the chair position of the Education Committee, she is then withdrawing from Pine Valley and gets moved over to the 6th position of the Finance and Personnel and Rules and Strategic Planning Committee. So that means that that is now a vacant spot, and we're going to just leave that alone for now. That would stay blank for now. So then go to the next slide. So now you see in yellow, that spot where Linda was is now indicated in yellow as a vacant seat. And we're seating the Land and Zoning, and it's Steve, Sean, Bob, Lee, Ingrid, Chad, and they meet and they elect Steve, who was on the Education Committee. So now that he is the chair of Land and Zoning, that means he's the 7th position of the Finance and the Rules. So now his position has become vacant. And then we move on to Fair and Recycling Meeting, which would be the next slide. And we are assigning Tim, Danielle, Peg, and Van to that committee. And Tim is elected chair, so he goes into the 8th position on Rules and Finance. And Tim was also on Education Committee. So he, having accepted the role of chair for Fair and Recycling and Parks, he then is removed from the Education Committee and that spot becomes open. And then if you go to Public Works, next slide, we do Gary, Steve, Don, Peg, Dan, Mark, Sean, and Danielle. And Gary is elected chair, so Gary fills the last spot on Finance and Personnel and Rules and Strategic Planning. So then that leaves us with 4 open seats. And if you look at the chart down below where we have everybody's named, you'll see that there are 4 open spots next to supervisors. So then those 4 people would be assigned to those open spots. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that we've filled them in with and now everybody has 3 committees. So that's how we could do it. I mean, we were talking logistics and, trying to think about physically, how long would it take for each body to meet? And I was thinking back to all of our, the first meetings we've had where we elect a chair and a vice chair, and in my experience, there's usually not a whole lot of debate, and it doesn't generally take very long to elect the chair. So maybe we give 10 minutes per standing committee, which would mean it'd take a little over an hour to do this whole process. So you know, let's just say an hour and a half. So it'd be longer, but then we would, you know, then we'd be ready to go. And for our next round of, you know, our May meetings, everyone would be seated. All the supervisors would be seated and ready to go. So I realized I ran through that kind of fast, but I mean, you get the idea of just going step by step. We at first had talked about having multiple committees meet at once to try to shorten the time, but really with the limitation of only 3 committees per person, you can't really do it that way without it becoming incredibly messy and confusing. So by doing it one by one, I think we could actually streamline it and go fairly quickly through the process. So that's all I have. I think. Did I miss anything, John?
No, I don't think so. And thanks for filling in on the people being limited to 3 standing committees. I had mentioned that before, and I probably should have. A big reason why this is like this is because we heard that feedback back in October about not liking that less democratic method of not having the committees appoint their various chairs. So this was basically a way to make it more democratic so that the whole county board would get a say over basically who would be in leadership roles. And another really significant change here is having the chair of each standing committee being part of finance and personnel and being part of the rules and strategic planning committees. Right now, a lot of times, the chairs of those various standing committees don't know what's happening at finance and personnel, and they either rely on other members, or if they don't have any members, sometimes there's just not that communication link. So the thinking here is that it would increase that knowledge of the budget and how it gets put together. The other thing I was going to mention before maybe pausing for a well-deserved break from hearing from especially me, but to get people a chance to answer questions is I was going to mention the document that is titled 04C Framework is another document that really I've heard some questions about, well, what would happen to this committee or that committee, or what are we getting rid of, or what are we adding? And so if we go to 04C, it's a fairly lengthy document, but I'll just highlight a couple pages on here. And step 1 is a really good place to start. When we were talking about all 54 of those committees, this is what we were talking about. This was everything that was in all of our committee structure documents. Some of them were just in our committee assignment document. There was nothing written about them. Really, from what I can tell, and some of you may know a lot better than I do with your greater experience, is that things have just gotten thrown in that committee structure document over the year, but no one's ever really gone through it and said, do we need this one anymore? Or, you know, are we explaining well what this committee does? So we're bringing changes regarding all of these. It's not perfect by any means. We spent a lot of time researching, calling different department heads and different county board members. Some of you may have heard from us. So step 1 was basically figuring out what to do with this long list. On step 2, these are those joint committees, and we took those joint committees out of the mix, those yellow highlighted ones. And then if we scroll down to the first page with red highlight on it, these were the ones that we looked at removing. I just want to read through those just so it'd be real clear to everyone. Besides committee on committees, it'd be removing the Administrator Transition Committee, which is no longer meeting, 2 CDBG committees that are no longer necessary. Continuous, which was an HHS related committee that's disbanded. Courthouse Security, which hasn't met for a long time. Hidden Valleys, which we removed from the budget. Southwest Badger Resource Conservation and Development Council, and Tri-County Airport Board of Appeals. Not because that Board of Appeals doesn't still exist, but just because the county's not involved in that one at all. We don't have any county board members. We don't appoint citizens, anything like that. So if we keep scrolling down, I'd say the next one is step 4.1, consolidation. First, where you see green, this was the list of committees that we were really looking at consolidating from 18 down to 9. At one point from 18 to 5. So when we talk about consolidating, that's what we're really referring to. And then we can skip several more pages. These are just going through the different options that we had looked at. And then we'll go all the way down to step 6.1, which has yellow again on it. And these were all those other bodies that we're involved with. Looks like I'm on page step 6. Oh, yep, there it is. I see it on everyone's screen now. These got split into 2 different categories on the next sheet. You'll see advisory bodies and special appointment bodies.
Sean, can I just add something?
Of course.
I just want to let people know that we actually contacted either the department heads or the people that, like the libraries and the thing, and actually confirmed with them what the role of the county board has been. I mean, we actually talked to everybody to make sure that we weren't excluding anything that we weren't supposed to, or that we, we're keeping all of our statutory duties intact as we go through this document.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. And then on the next slide, reporting, step 7.1, there's no highlighting, but currently it's been a little unclear how, say, just to randomly pick one, how does the housing authority relate to Richland County government? Or how does the branding committee that we just formed relate? And so here in parentheses, each one of these different groups that aren't part of our standing committee structure that's being proposed tonight would report to a standing committee when desired, if they want to give a report on what they're doing, or when necessary, when something needs to get to the county board, and it would basically go through a standing committee first. A lot of this doesn't happen right now, so it was just meant to create kind of a hierarchy of the different committees, just to be clear. And then I'd say the last document, which I'm not going to scroll through, but I think is probably the most important, that has so many of the changes that we've been discussing and that a lot of people have been really interested in, would be 04F, the structure document. And that's the one that we currently, this is where we give authority to different committees. And there are a lot of track changes in here. And a lot of the things we've talked about are within here. So with that, I'll pause for questions and comments. And I don't know if Supervisors Severson, Cosgrove, or Seep want to add anything as well.
Okay, members of the committee, do you have a comment? The chair recognizes Mr. McKee then, who has a question.
Yes, I have a question. Is it my understanding that the Pine Valley Board of Trustees will go away?
No, it would not go away. So, and I should mention too, one thing that kind of jumped out to me when Melissa and I laid out that example, because of the way state statute is written, Pine Valley Board of Trustees must be elected by the county board. They cannot be appointed by the county board chair. So they would actually have to go first at the organizational meeting, and they would need to be elected by the entire county board.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
they would just be
to perform the duties they are right now.
Mr. Chair, can we get Mr. McKee to repeat that? I didn't quite hear it.
Okay. So the Board of Trustees would perform its duties as they currently are, like approving the bills, and we meet once a month. Is that what I'm?
Yes. So one thing I'd highlight that probably would be the biggest change is that Pine Valley and child support would be combined into one standing committee. Yes, that standing committee would still function as the Pine Valley Community Village Board of Trustees. in accordance with Wisconsin statute 46.18. So I was obviously reading that came from the committee structure document.
So we would still meet monthly as trustees at Pine Valley.
Somewhere.
The location I'm not sure of, but yes, and Mr. Langreck put together a potential schedule, and in that schedule, he has it that standing committee would meet once a month. However, any committee as it currently operates can meet more often. We have a lot of committees that I think the fair committee is a good example that meets very often, especially near the fair. So that flexibility would still be there for the standing committee to choose the frequency of their meetings.
So we would, as trustees, continue to meet on a monthly basis and conduct the business of Pine Valley, correct?
That's correct.
And child support.
Okay. I guess I don't see where child support fits with Pine Valley. Pine Valley is somewhat of a unique part of the county. It produces its own budget. It hires and fires. It has its own audit. And now we're proposing to combine it with a unrelated committee.
And I think that one, Richard, that was probably the one that made the least sense to all of us as well. However, we talked about the importance of having meetings where more than one department head is located in the meeting. So LEJC is a really good example of a current committee that we have that would kind of operate like this proposal, where you have multiple, you have in that example, you have the sheriff, you have the clerk of court, you have the register and probate, you have the district attorney. They're all coming to one meeting and discussing issues. And I think one way to promote this idea of more accountability and more collaboration and information getting shared is not to have one department operating amongst themselves, as an island among unto themselves, I think would be the saying. So it didn't seem like the best match to any of us either, and maybe there is a better solution. We did see some other counties that they'll combine their nursing home with their veterans, and they'll call it like a aging and veterans committee. In this situation, our recommendation was to combine HHS with veterans, and that kind of left child support out there. And so I think we've definitely heard some feedback here, and I don't know what the best solution is, but I think the greater good we're looking for is departments working together, more of that.
I just don't understand the reasoning behind that. I mean, like I said, they're totally two unrelated groups, and now you're suggesting that we combine them. And it's going to make the operation of Pine Valley more difficult, because the Pine Valley Board of Trustees conducts the business for Pine Valley. They approve the bills, they discuss staffing, they do all of that. How is that going to relate to child support? And why? I think child support should belong, and Pine Valley should stand alone. Because, and you're talking about the chair being on the finance and personnel committee or whatever, which is extremely complicated, what has been presented. And I have some very big concerns that it's going to be detrimental to Pine Valley. Pine Valley is kind of a standalone entity.
The chair recognizes Mr. McGuire. Who has a comment or question?
Uh, I believe, hopefully I'm not mistaken on this, but doesn't child support only meet 6 times a year?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Is that correct?
this is Supervisor Turk, Chair of the Child Support Committee. What we meet on an as-needed basis. It doesn't always happen every month.
Okay.
Mr. Turk, while you have the floor, perhaps you could comment on the compatibility of Pine Valley and child support.
I see a great deal of incompatibility. I appreciate the philosophical reasoning for it, but I think in the practical sense, it's a great disservice to both Pine Valley and child support. Child support being located, presently in our courthouse facility. I'm assuming those meetings would happen at Pine Valley, necessitating the child support director either attending virtually or having to leave to attend physically. And child support interacts with other agencies on a regular basis, none of which are Pine Valley.
Thank you.
I think it would make sense, as Supervisor McKee was saying, to move it elsewhere. And I would not have an issue with Pine Valley being on its own.
Thank you. Anyone else?
This is Supervisor Severson. I would concur with Pine Valley sitting alone. I do think that there's other couple committees that would be nice standalone. I've said this right from the beginning, and I'm Sean, Melissa, and Clint can attest to this. But I think Fair and Recycling and Parks should be a standalone committee also, not combined together.
Excuse me, Carrie. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? I can't remember the document I just read.
When this started out, I totally agree with the concept of going to the standing committees. I think it does serve the county well in certain areas and certain aspects. But I also said from the beginning that there might be some committees that just need to stand alone and be their own separate thing for now. That doesn't mean 2 years from now we can look at it and gradually take those committees that we put off to the side and put them into a different structure. But I think right now, just as stuff's going, I think maybe Fair Recycling should stand alone separate, and I think the park should stand alone. And I do agree with maybe what Supervisor McGuire was saying, that Pine Valley should maybe stand alone. I never thought of that. It's just something more to think about right now and discuss instead of just trying to ramrod and push it through.
Thank you. I don't want to poll every board member separately, so chime in here, folks. This is a committee of the whole we're operating as. Yes, Mr. Manning.
Feel there are definitely going to be committees that are so different from other ones, and I'm bringing up highway. Just wondering what would really blend in.
Can one of the authors of the documents respond to that, please?
Can you repeat what he said? I can't hear him.
Wonders what would blend in with highway. He doesn't understand why highway wouldn't be a standalone, I think.
Correct.
Well, and I think that kind of gets to, what is the purpose of doing all this? And I certainly think that, as we start to think about each different committee of the county, it is easy to start to think, well, that committee should operate by itself. That committee, I think I remember you, Chair Brewer, you mentioned at one of our meetings, well, what are they called? I can't remember the name of these departments that are on their own fiscally that we have separate audits for. Enterprises. Enterprise
departments.
Yeah, so I think what's really key here is, what does collaboration bring between different departments? How does it change the focus of what these committees are doing? We've been pretty used to, hearing quite a bit of detail on each department, but then not oftentimes focusing on what's the big picture policy stuff. I think the highway committee is actually a good example in state statute. And this is in the committee structure document as it's proposed here. State statute says that once you have an administrator form of government, that the highway committee is no longer basically calling the day-to-day shots on the management of the highway department. They're looking more at broad policy and generally where should the highway department be going. So I think the point of a lot of this of combining committees is to I know we heard from some different counties that if a certain department, say like veterans or child support or whatever it might be, doesn't have anything for the agenda that month, that department head doesn't necessarily need to go to this meeting. The purpose of doing the consolidation is to really focus our work as a county board more on big picture issues instead of the little stuff. So certainly you could pick highway and you could put it off by itself. You could do that with Pine Valley. I could see combining child support with say another standing committee like HHS. But it really gets back to this. What's the reason? Why would you want to combine different committees? I can speak personally for myself. I'm on a couple of what I think we would call smaller committees with departments with 4 or fewer people in them, and we don't actually make a lot of decisions. We hear a lot of details, a lot of little stuff, but then we don't actually set policy for the department, which is what we keep hearing from the counties association is more of our role as county board members. We're really not there to be managing staff on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, Ingrid had her hand up. Ingrid Glassspinner.
Hi, I just want to make sure you guys can hear me. Having trouble with my speaker.
You
Yeah?
can, loud and clear.
Okay, all right, thank you. I had a couple of questions, but I'm going to focus on the ones that have to do with the structure that you had. I had some from the previous parts of the presentation, but for right now, I don't know if we could pull back up that picture of the executive committees with the standing committees. Some of my questions are just concerns with, I guess, first of all, how does this actually work? In other words, do each of these 7 standing committees that are below the 2 executive committees, they're reporting directly to the ones that are above them? Is that my understanding? And sending forward resolutions to those 2 executive committees? Guess that would be my first question.
I'll call on Sean or Melissa, or we haven't heard from Administrator Langreck yet tonight, so maybe he'd want to respond to that.
Yeah, that might be a good question for Mr. Langreck to answer. Yeah.
And so I guess how I visualize this through the model that's in place here, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
How I would visualize this is that, yes, like resolution creation and taking things to the county board, that there would be, as part of rules and resolutions, there would be a review on the resolutions prior to them going to the county board, to kind of, the first off, to kind of assess and make sure that it's an action that actually needs to be taken by the county board. If it's something that we have authority established for the standing committees or for administration to take care of, to see if it can be handled at those levels. And then as well to make sure that it's, of course, fitting with strategic plans and finances and all those types of things. To kind of put it on like a calendar or a timeline to see how a rotation of a battle rhythm would work. A proposed document that was released out to departments to say just, hey, if we switch to standing committees, can we configure our monthly battle rhythm into an agenda that kind of looks like this? And this is absolutely just a proposed draft scheme. It does not account for the actual members on these committees that have the freedom of deciding when meetings are and where they are. But the idea was to have kind of the front week of a month loaded with your standing committee meetings, where you're conducting a standing committee meeting in the afternoons and the mornings. And then the following week, then you have a finance and personnel committee meeting that can review resolutions and ensure ones that need financial blessings to go forward for borrowing purposes or whatever, that they have a chance to review those, along with also those are all your chairs, essentially, that are going to be kind of bringing those resolutions forward from their committees. And then, of course, that's going then in the packet and then allowed to take action by the county board in the third week. So again, this is just kind of a timeline, again, a recommendation, but nothing's finalized and it still has to work at the convenience of the members of those committees. Does that help Supervisor Glassbrenner with trying to visualize the possible process?
Yes, that does. So if we could go back then again to that picture of the committees. I just wanted to share a couple questions or concerns I have. I, appreciate the idea of consolidating, of reducing some of the, we've had so many different committees and things like that. And I also hear you on accountability, but some of my questions on this are, in order to be a member on one of these executive committees, you have to be a chair of one of these standing committees, which limits that down, besides the chair and the vice chair, to 7 members of the board. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 7 members of our county board, with the county board chair and vice chair acting as chair and vice chair of those 2 executive committees. My concern with this is that it seems to be somewhat of a consolidation of, I hate to use the word power, so to speak, but in other words, in a not ideal situation where things could be put off or pushed forward depending on a few people's, and in particular, the chair and the vice chair's desire. Now, I know we've always had it kind of set that the chair can set the agenda, but with the many different committees sending forward resolutions, it had seemed to be maybe a bit more democratic in the past. And the other concern that I would have with this is that, okay, I'm going to use myself as an example, just because it was the easiest one I could find on here. For example, we've got strategic planning now being a part of this standing committee. For someone like myself who's been on that particular committee for, the last year, the only way that I would have any chance of being on that committee was if I was a chair of one of these committees down here, which, to be honest, when there's 7 people out of the whole board, is not that percentage of that is not that likely, especially if it's a board that, maybe I haven't served on that much. And so what I'm saying is that going to happen with other committees where people that have been invested in certain committees now actually don't have any chance to even sit on that committee? And I appreciate the idea of having everybody only sit on 3 committees. But then it also limits, if you accept a chair of something, you may be taking yourself out of the running to even be a part of another board that you are interested in or that you've been invested in the past. And so my concern is, does that actually, with your point to it, increasing accountability for members, I'm trying to decide, who does that increase accountability for? Perhaps the chairs of those members, of those committees, but what about the average member? How much input do they, how much impact do they really have on the running of the county board in this particular structure, unless they're an actual chair of a committee? And does that disenfranchise them then, or disincentivize contribution, when you could potentially have a 3 standing committee assignment with no chair or any type of, input as far as that goes? I don't know if I'm making sense, but that was some of my concerns. Stop there.
Thank you for those comments. Mr. Carroll, your hand was up.
Yes, I have a
I'm
similar.
sorry. Can I just say, is somebody going to address? Because I actually had a question in there.
Was there a question? Right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I guess I wanted to hear from the committee what their thoughts were on those comments.
Yeah, I think just my opinion on it. One, I think it could be looked at definitely as a disadvantage that if you can only be on 3 committees, if you're the chair of one of the committees, we can kind of look at it both ways. If you're the chair of one of the committees, then you wouldn't really be able to get to serve on another committee. You'd be on finance and personnel and rules and strategic planning. That would be kind of I think something that each of us would have to weigh. Would we want to be a chair of a committee? Because then it would basically make us lose membership on those other 6 standing committees that are lower down on the chart. As far as, I think the question about accountability, well, and actually to go back to that one, I think the way it's currently set up with, especially if you're a new county board member, you really don't have as much of a, typically, this isn't always true, but typically you don't have as much of a chance to get on what I think a lot of us consider to be the power committees. You're kind of limited to your, you get basically put on the small stuff, until you have more seniority on the board. I think the advantage of this system would be that would be more spread out. You have more of a chance, especially as a newer member or someone with less seniority, to get on. I think as it's laid out here, the power is more spread out than it is right now. Your second question, I think, was about accountability and how does it increase accountability to have fewer meetings? And one of the things that I think is going on right now, and I've heard about other counties, that used to have our model and went to more of what would have been our previous chart, where they have fewer standing committees. I think we've basically kind of got something in between right here as a proposal. But is that if you can't keep track of all those 18 standing committee meetings, plus the joint bodies, plus all those other special appointment ones, there's just so many meetings, you can't get to them all. It's hard, even if you're someone who's not serving on a committee, to track what's going on at other meetings. This would provide the opportunity for not only us as county board members, but for the administrator, for staff to be collaborating and working with each other more. And if you don't have that, I think in our current system, sometimes I think that's easier for more confusion to develop about what decisions were made at what committees and where does it go, how does it get to the county board. So I think the accountability question has to do with, are we saying things in front of everybody, or are we saying them in small groups? And do our decisions actually get to the right place? I don't think that everything necessarily has to go through the executive committees. I don't think that's really been determined. I think the way our current county board rules are set up is that certain things go to finance and personnel before they go to the county board. A good example would be the fairgrounds purchase of that mower. Because it was a purchase more than $10,000, the way our current county board rules are written is that has to go to has to be considered it has to go to county board, and typically practice has been for that to go to finance and personnel first. But we don't really have a lot of that ironed out. It's not currently ironed out. Some of that discussion needs to happen about how much are we bringing to county board and how does that relate to accountability.
And that,
Do you have a
thank you, Sean, that
follow-up
was
question,
more my-
Ingrid?
Sorry, yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
That is really what I was looking for as far as the accountability, was because on that current flow chart, what it appears to be is that each of those standing committees then reports to the executive committees, which then sends forward things to the county board. And my question then for that was, what that appears to do is limit any type of power to influence the actual running of the county board to a few of those members, which would be the chairs, which actually limits, to your point of the multiple members having more of a chance. In my mind, it actually limits it down more. But you're saying that hasn't been ironed out. I think that would really need to be clarified, because as it appears right now, it looks that everything is getting streamlined through 2 executive committees, which have very limited opportunities for participating members.
Okay, thank you.
Talk-
Mr. Carroll, I want to get Steve, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, looking at the organization chart here, two things. The flow of resolutions, if you will, right now it looks like things are flowing through rules and strategic planning with the little line connection there. But I guess when you have two executive committees at the same level, I'm not clear what things go to which, and I have a somewhat of an answer for Ingrid in that since there is a chair from each of the standing committees going to be on the executive committee, there actually is a voice, if you will, from each of those that's participating in there. So it's kind of like an extra line of communication, which should advocate for what that individual committee wants to do. So anyway, my initial question is I'm trying to understand the flow of resolutions, whether they go through the finance and personnel or rules and strategic planning, or what exactly happens between the standing committees and the county board.
Does someone care to answer that?
Mr. Chair, this is Melissa. I'll just make a comment. So when I was making this chart that you're looking at right now, it was being uncooperative in letting me put a line. So there actually should be a line from finance and personnel down that also goes to the standing committees. And I think part of what we can define is, well, what issues, and I think we do the same thing now. I mean, there are issues that come from our current committees that end up going to rules before they go to the county board. And there are some issues that come from our committees that end up needing to go to finance and personnel as it's defined in our rules document. So, I mean, I think that we would define whether or not something that comes from any of our subcommittees needs to go through finance or needs to go to the rules, or whether it goes directly to county board. We haven't had a very in-depth conversation about exactly how that would happen. And I think that's something that we could figure out.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. McKee has another comment.
Yeah. There seems like there's a lot of questions in this whole procedure. I personally am not ready to vote on this. And what is the reason that it has to be done tonight? Why can't it be done 6 months down the road? Because these questions are all good questions, and I don't see the answer to a lot of them. And if it requires a motion, I would make a motion that we table this until we have further information.
Okay, we have a motion to table. Do we have a second? Mr. McGuire seconds. Now, on a tabling motion, do we have a discussion? We don't have corp counsel on, do we?
You do.
Tabling motion.
Council is just very sick. Motion to table, there is discussion. It would be the motion to postpone that precludes discussion. I would just say limited discussion and relevant to the purpose of tabling it.
And
Again, I can't hear Wendell.
We can have discussion, I believe he said, limited discussion.
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Yes, go ahead.
If the motion is to table, that means we're going to deal with it before the meeting is concluded. If we're going to consider it at a later meeting, that would be a motion to postpone, sir.
That would be my motion then.
And then as Attorney Wendell pointed out, a motion to postpone does not have discussion.
All right, you're withdrawing your motion to table. Will you withdraw your second?
Okay, a motion to postpone.
Do we have a second to the motion to postpone? McGuire.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question first?
I think you can. Go ahead.
So does a motion to postpone basically in the meeting then? Because
Mr. Wendell?
I think that, you know, I think hearing more feedback and questions would be helpful while we've got everyone. So that's why I'm kind of questioning that.
It would move to the next agenda item for a meeting with only one item, then yes, it would pretty effectively end it.
Anyone else have a comment here?
Are we postponing to a certain date or are we postponing indefinitely?
Indefinitely until we have further information and further questions are answered.
Mr. Chair, to Sean's point, I have further questions that I would appreciate being able to ask in this setting. So I don't know at what point we'd get these questions answered if we're postponing it immediately right now without discussing what other questions people might have.
Well, let's hold our motion to postpone and our second in abeyance here for a moment and talk about this a little bit more. Please. Now, someone talk.
So I have a question, Mr. Chair, if no one else speaks.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Mine was on one of the further or the earlier points when in the process of electing a board and a chair and vice chair. Just a question on how that actually works, because it said that you would need to put forward biographies, but you can't lobby other people, but yet then at the meeting, there are nominations and seconds, and then the candidates can speak. Who is making those nominations if no one has any idea of who is wanting to be chair and vice chair?
I had that thought myself, Ingrid. If I run for board chair, I hope somebody nominates me, but I can't ask them to, so. But go ahead.
Mr. Chair, this is Melissa. So anyone who is interested in running for chair or vice chair would indicate that on their form that is sent to all of us with all of the information. So we would know going into that meeting who intends to run. And we would have all of their information in front of us before the meeting. It would be sent as part of our packet.
Normally, you
So
put
at the
or in your second before that takes place.
No, I'm saying we would know who wants to run, and then people could nominate. We
Okay.
would ask for nominations, and people know who is interested. And so if someone wants to nominate someone from the list of who said they're interested, then they would go ahead and nominate them.
Or anyone else.
Mr. Gaccio had a comment.
Oh, I don't remember that, but I do actually. So my comment slash question would be probably building off of some of the questions that Ingrid has asked already. Is these meetings are going to be long. Consequently, there's no way around it. We're going to build in efficiency over time. But just this draft schedule was really helpful for me to kind of conceptualize what this is going to look like. And even at 2 hours, you know, potentially 4 hours of meetings during business hours on a weekday would be a pretty significant change. And I appreciate the comment that we have some latitude as individual committees to change that, but it's going to be a math issue really quickly. Because I do believe it makes sense to get these standing committee meetings taken care of in the first week of the month logistically, so everything can kind of cascade behind that. So that's one thing to consider. Does it disenfranchise or exclude some folks that have schedules during the day? I don't know what the percentage of us that would be, and maybe that's just something we need to agree on as board members when we run for office, that this is going to be the time commitment. But furthermore, beyond us, there is a lot of citizen members, even with the consolidation. There's actually more citizen members to consider in some of these newly formed standing committees that, you know, may take issue or exception with the time commitment as well. So just something to consider if we go this route. It's looking advantageous for me, but perhaps we have a rule for meeting as a county board at 7 p.m. Maybe we want to set up parameters for meeting times for standing committees as well, just a consideration. And I guess the question would be, did the rules committee speak on those types of things like meeting times at all when they were deliberating this?
Mr. Langrick published a list. Clint, can you respond to that?
I don't think that we went into talking on the details again on when any types of meetings were going to be held. Again, my goal in releasing this out is it is a draft type of a document, and it's just tried to again capture what other counties presented for how they're handling their meetings. It's certainly understandable that it makes it a challenge for folks with 9-to-5 jobs to try to designate up to 4 hours in a given week to do this. And if you're, it could be even 6 hours with 3 committees. So that is a challenge. I put in perspective of, this is our current existing type of a schedule. It works for us. Everybody that's on these committees, for the most part, is able to participate. It's a challenge for individuals in onesies and twosies. And if it migrates back to looking like something like this for the needs of committee members, whether they're county board supervisors or citizen members, that's okay. It can happen that way. The mindset of trying to have it look like this, which again is just a draft on paper, is kind of for that efficiency system of trying to know when we're scheduling that the first week is obligation kind of for committee meetings. The second week, then predominantly if you're on finance and personnel, you're signed up for a Tuesday, and then everybody's signed up for that third Thursday at 7 p.m. It doesn't count though for all the other supporting committees, seats that you may be assigned, etc. So again, it's just a concept that's out there, but it has to be flexible. First and foremost to the folks that are assigned to the committees, the members, and then trying to make sure though that we have administrative support, MIS support for facilitating those meetings. So I don't know if did that answer your question, Supervisor Gottschall?
It helps, and like I said, I do appreciate the visual. That helps me to kind of start to think about this. I think the X factor for why perhaps it's working a little better today is a lot of these committee meetings are an hour or less. And I just don't foresee a reality where that's going to be possible with the consolidation. So just something for folks to consider, that with the consolidation is probably going to come a different form of a time commitment that could be longer meetings, that there's limited times throughout the week where they could be scheduled.
Mr. Van Landijk has a comment.
Yeah, I guess I've got a question, and there are a number of these issues, these structures that are still debatable, but there's a number that are not. I was chairman of the Veterans Committee, and I can very well see the Veterans Committee being incorporated with HHS. Is it possible that this evening we do some of that incorporation to kind of get those out of the way, and then we can still debate the other things that might need to be taken care of? Do we need to do this all at one time, or can we take care of the ones that are okay and get those passed, and then we can work on the remainder of it? Is that a possibility?
Well, right now we have a motion to postpone.
Well, if we were to
I think we
supersede
have
that,
to-
if it's
I think
okay.
we have to deal with that first, but I see some hands up. Vice Chair Turk, please, first.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a logistical, procedural kind of question about the organizational meeting as it's being envisioned. If we elect the chair and the vice chair, is it realistic to expect that whomever's elected would have a list of everybody they want to appoint right away ready to appoint committees immediately after that?
So,
Impression.
there was a slide previously about the process for electing the chair and the vice chair.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was the first step, or it might have been the second step, is that everyone on the whole county board would receive all of those survey forms that we all fill out. Right now, I'm not sure how that's happening currently. If it's just going to, was it going to the clerk perhaps before we had an administrator?
I believe that was
but
the
I think
case.
the idea. Okay, so I think the idea would be that those candidates who are interested in chair would come forward, and they would have studied that list and looked through it. Currently, what happens, I think, is that there's got to be a month delay. The committee on committees has to meet at some point after that organizational meeting. And so no one's really looking at that, I think, except for the clerk. At that organizational meeting. So yes, there would be some expectation that the chair candidates would have to think through what would be the going through and seeing what people's top priorities would be.
Okay, we're flying.
And half of the counties that I did research, they do currently do it like that. They do it at the organizational meeting, I believe, if I remember right.
We haven't heard from department heads. Darren Gudgeon has his hand up. Please.
Thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, so I guess first of all, I'd like to start out by saying that I want to, in front of all of you, say thank you to Supervisor Murphy Lopez, Supervisor Luck, and Supervisor Severson for reaching out to me as a department head. Their questions were really good, and I appreciated them seeking out that input. Secondly, as a department head of two departments, I think that the emergency management move under public safety is a good one. There's a lot of projects that I work directly with the sheriff on, sheriff's department, and therefore, if I have something at the emergency management committee and it needs to go on to the law enforcement committee, and then it needs to go on to another one, there's a lot of inefficiencies built into that. So I think that that's going to be a good thing. From a department head standpoint, the way the structure is set up, and I know all of you have a lot more input on this than I do as a department head. You hire me to manage some departments, and you folks set policy and set the vision. But I do see, so from a department head standpoint, some efficiencies in the sense of, if I have a resolution that needs to go to county board and it doesn't directly involve a large purchase capital expense, and if it's spelled out in your other supporting documents, then I know that I have to go to the Rules and Resolutions Committee if it's a contract, or if it's my mitigation plan, or whatever the case may be. So that again adds a little bit more efficiency. Sorry, my dog's going to chime in here too, and I apologize for that. There was another thought, and I'm going to try to keep this really short, but just all those thoughts were coming out, and I want to be able to share them. The second one was the infrastructure. I know that was a question on, is highway should be separate, and I know that there's be debate on that, and I appreciate that. It does make sense to me the way that is set up, because it's infrastructure. It's infrastructure for the county, and those groups can meet. Two questions that I had would be, one, and I think Supervisor Murphy Lopez might have answered this, but I just want to be clear. I would report to my home committee at least quarterly, so that we can talk about where I'm at with the budget and things like that. But if there wasn't anything specific, as a department head, would I have the opportunity just to bow out? Because sitting in a meeting with no real purpose isn't good use of my time. Not that I would not want to participate, but there might be some meetings where I would look at it and say, well, I've already done my quarterly presentation. I don't have anything really to put forth. Is that possible? So that's I guess my first question.
Yeah, the short answer to that is yes. That's how other counties do it that have restructured and right-sized their committees.
Okay. And then
Darren,
speaking,
sorry, this is Melissa. I just have one comment to add to that. I think that absolutely, if there's nothing imperative that you need to share, that you would not need to come. On the other hand, there are times when the chair might want you to come if issues being discussed in other departments have a bearing that's larger than just that department, and be seeking input from other department heads. And that's where the collaboration piece really would come into play.
yeah, absolutely. And I can appreciate that, because then there would be a purpose, you know, there'd be a purpose for myself as a department head to attend that meeting. So I like that flexibility piece. The second question I have, and it has no bearing on it, just out of curiosity, for the Joint Ambulance Committee, with the chair and vice chair, is that a thought to make sure that everybody's on 3 committees?
No, it didn't have anything to do with that. And that has been a little confusing to me. Actually, Supervisor Severson had mentioned at the last meeting that the chair currently appoints 2 members, which are currently him and Supervisor Cooey to the ambulance committee. I'm not seeing that anywhere in our current rules that the chair is in charge of appointing those people. The proposal that's before everyone tonight, the structure document, that's a change. It would be the chair and the vice chair serving on the joint ambulance committee. So that's the way it's written, right or wrong. So,
Chair Brewer, and the reason we've done it that way, they're called designees. We designate someone to take our place that has more experience, more proficiency in those areas. That's why I did it.
Mr. Chair, this is
Yes,
Melissa.
go ahead.
One quick comment. The other reasoning that Sean has not mentioned yet was when we were looking at all of the bodies that are city county collaboration, we felt like it was important for the chair and vice chair to represent the county's interests when we're working with the city. And so that's why that's one of the reasons, I think, why we thought it was important to have them on the joint ambulance committee.
Okay, sure.
Aaron, are you done with your questions and comments?
I think just the last piece is to the length of your meetings. I envision from a department head standpoint, that as this goes through, this will allow for department heads to naturally gravitate more towards Mr. Langrick, who was hired as the administrator, and the committees will spend less time on, you know, approving a phone bill, approving those operational things. And what it will really do, I think, is allow for county board members to, and I'm going to speak more from the example of emergency management, a policy or something that the county board might want to see is maybe more mitigation efforts, which affect all of the county of Richland. So that would be something where that oversight committee would, here's a vision. We want you to research this. What can we do about this? What's your thoughts on this? And get us get the supervisors out of the minutia of things like our budget. If it's approved by the county board, could I potentially just go to Mr. Langrick and say, this is the line item, this was what it was in, the board already approved that, can I make this expenditure? Mr. Langrick agrees, and then we move on. And the committee's going to know that up front, because they're going to help the department head build that budget that's presented. But from that point, then it really does become operational between the department head and the administrator. And I like that conduit being established. So, because I think it's going to bring a lot of efficiency. So I appreciate the time that you've given me, and I know it's a long meeting, and I appreciate the chair recognizing me, and I will, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Supervisor Severson, you had your hand up before.
Yeah, I would decline to other people to talk. Like I said, I think that we need to start out slow and work our way up into where we want to go. And I'm not a fan of this model where I have to decide whether there should be what committees I would want to be on, because I don't really care to be on finance and personnel. If I get selected as chair for one committee, well, now I got to be on finance and personnel, and maybe I don't want to be on that. Maybe like Ingrid, who's been a leader of strategic planning, maybe she's going to say, you know, I would be a really good on these 3 committees, but now I have to give that up because I would like to be chair for this one because I can lead that, but then also be on strategic planning and can't be.
Thank you. Mr. Carroll, one last comment.
Okay, quickly. This is just an example of some of the stuff we're going to have to iron out, but I'm currently on the audit committee, and we take over an hour just as quickly as we can looking through bills and signing them. And now in this proposed structure, audit would be taken in by finance and personnel. So I'm assuming that's not really going to keep happening. And so there's things like that that are going to have to get worked out, where maybe we do turn more and more of these day-to-day things over to administration, and we start focusing more on policy. But those things, that's just an example of some of these things are going to have to get ironed out once we kick this off.
Okay, thank you. My sense as chairman of this committee is that we're not going to reach consensus tonight. So my question is, we have a motion to postpone. We want to postpone till next week and have another meeting? Your thoughts?
Mr. Chair, can I kind of answer your question and Supervisor Van Landijk's try to answer them simultaneously?
Go ahead.
He had mentioned, what about combining HHS and veterans? And I just wanted to take the opportunity to say that, whether or not you agree with, the idea of consolidating committees, I know a lot of people have hesitation about it. And I understand it's a big change. There are a lot of things that were uncovered in this process that I guess that, how do I want to say, the committee structure document right now is very, I don't know how to say it politely, it's kind of a mess. And we just uncovered all these different things that are not accurate or are missing or shouldn't be there anymore. It was kind of I think we did talk about this at the committee, at what stage do we bring things to the full county board? I think back in October, we were of the minds collectively that it should go to the county board, Mr. Langrick's proposal. I think it was about a month and a half ago, the idea was brought up again, should we take this to the county board before it gets further developed? And the thinking at that time of the committee was, no, let's further develop it before it goes to the county board. I know that there are pieces of this that are probably less, debatable. Some things are pretty clear cut. So I do think some things, could be changed. It's just going to be a matter of kind of, I think, sorting all those out. We could have brought all of this stuff in little pieces, and maybe that's the way we should have done it. But right or wrong, it all came at once. I don't know about, I think we've gotten a lot of feedback from folks tonight. So the rules committee could meet again, to try to separate out, some things that we think might be more palatable to the county board before the next county board gets seated. I think that's definitely a possibility. We did have a regularly scheduled meeting for the first week in April. We're all in our seats, even people who aren't running again. We're all in our seats until that organizational meeting. So, it's possible for the county board to meet again beforehand, or it's possible for us to forward something to the organizational meeting for it to be adopted there as well. A lot of ways this could be done.
Well, I think there's time to have an additional meeting. Mr. Manning?
I want to make one quick comment. I think you people have all worked very hard at this. I appreciate it. If I had to make a suggestion at all, is I think maybe you went from way too many meetings. I think of 54, maybe brought it down a little too far. I think it might have been a little bit of an overreach there. There's definitely a lot of questions that need to be answered first, but certainly appreciate all the effort.
Miss
Frank.
Bob.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I have listened or watched the videos.
I'm really impressed. I think this is an incredibly bold step. I like it. I think we have some questions. I think we have a few things that we have to iron out. I think change is good. I think rattling things and making things happen is good. We need to get some questions answered. And I don't want to see this stall. I would like the committee to meet again, the rules committee, sort out some of the questions that have come up here. It's been a great conversation, and like with talking with Darren, there's a process here now that you can actually look at. You can see what the structure is. You can see what the timetables are. And as for the extra meetings, yeah, maybe we're going to have a little more time, but we're going to be sitting in one meeting for 2 hours instead of 3 meetings for 45 minutes each. And I appreciate the comments about Pine Valley being with child support. Don't take this wrong. So what? It's 2 separate meetings if you want to do that. Child support meets when they need to. If you want to have a meeting that's just child support for some reason, you could do that. You're the charge of that committee. That's okay. If you want to have them together, that's okay too. That works out. You take care of one business and then you go on to the next business. It's no different than LEJC. The different organizations, you meet with each one, you discuss each one, and you work through it. So thank you for the work. I think this is a great direction.
Well, I don't think all is lost here. Clint, I'm speaking to you. I think we still have time. I think this was a very healthy discussion, brought out a lot of concerns. Do you have a comment, sir?
I don't. I guess if I know we talked about having another meeting next week. I guess I'm just trying to get, from an administrative standpoint, I'm trying to support the orientation meeting, just so everybody understands. You know, our current design here on the left is we would do a roll call, oath of office. We would seat, or we would elect a chair, elect a vice. We would elect a committee on committees. We do election of a highway committee, election of a board of trustee members, those that are phasing out. And then we go into an approval of an agenda, and if we had business agenda items, and then adjourn. Last session, things were kind of a little bit askewed because we had the pandemic. We ended up doing our organizational meeting out at the highway garage, and it was I think even on a special meeting. So do keep in mind though, with our current design and historic practice, committee on committees then would have to meet at a later date in April. They would come back then with proposals for appointments through the chair and administrator on the board on the 17th, and then those committees will go off after May 17th to appoint their officers and carry on with their business. So the design is different though if we're going to approach that orientation meeting as proposed tonight with the resolution. As Melissa kind of walked us through, we would elect a vice, and from there, then we would elect the Pine Valley committees. They would elect a chair. We would then the board and the county board chair and the administrator would present the slate for confirmation on the non-executive standing committees. Those boards would meet. Those non-executive committees would then in turn select their chairs. And it would be a little bit more lengthy of a process, obviously, on that night, but we would arrive at having those committees and the chairs established in that same evening. To try to manage the flow again, the question was how would we know from a chair on that given night, working with administrator, understanding what everybody's places are going to be. I would envision having a slate kind of laid out on the different assignments so that when it's brought forward for the county board to approve, that they would have an understanding on where everyone's at and that we have all the supervisor seats filled. And if we go with the same type of a process for committee on committees, I would see then without another court counter board meeting before that administrative meeting that we're going to be seating our existing committees, boards, and commissions as they currently are. And then we would have to have almost a reorganizational meeting at a later date in the session. Those would be my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Did we want to set up a date for a future meeting tonight? We can postpone till then. Go ahead, Ms. Gentis.
So if we want to basically have this structure, which I think is good. I don't understand if rules and, I mean, we still have to send out all the stuff to fill out if you're elected. So rules and regulations should meet fairly soon, so that even if, I know the election's the 5th, but I don't quite understand if you're not elected, you're still in your seat until the 19th. But we'd still, if we wait too long, we can't put forth and who wants to run for chair or whatever. I'm not doing that, but we have to do this fairly soon to get these questions answered, is what I'm saying.
The timeline for getting information out to you folks on what your preferences are for committees as they currently are, or as the proposed standing committee changes would be. Yes, that timeline is growing shorter every day as we approach the organizational meeting. So trying to make the decisions on what the structures look like, get that information out to you folks so you can then fill it out with your preferences and get us back to us to work with who the potential interested folks are for a chair and develop those slates gets more and more compressed each day.
Yeah, I agree.
And Mr.
8
Chair,
weeks.
may I answer the question about the Rules Committee?
Yes.
So our regularly scheduled meeting is for Thursday, April 7th, and I do agree we would need to meet sooner than that if a special county board meeting is set up in order to meet some of these timelines that Mr. Langrick was talking about. So I understand that. I was just mentioning what we had adjourned to, but we have met specially sometimes when there was a need.
I don't think we necessarily have to adjourn to a date certain here. But I tell you what, the hour is late. We've been beating this to death for 2 hours. We have a motion to postpone in a second. I think I'll call roll on that motion. If you please, Mr. Kalish.
I asked a procedural question first.
Yes, sir.
Shouldn't we need to know when we're postponing until?
I don't know if you have to have a date certain, Mr. Window.
I believe it was postponed indefinitely. So
Which means we can pick it up when we choose.
How do we?
correct.
How do we call it?
Indefinitely is a definite article in this instance.
What, gentlemen, I have a question, Williamson here.
Yes,
If this motion to postpone fails, then what are we gonna do? Are we gonna continue? Because we haven't even voted yet, which
but
technically we're,
can we vote on the motion?
right, but technically
Vote on
we
the
weren't even
resolution.
supposed to discuss, and we've been discussing for an hour, so.
2 hours.
Not since the motion has been made, no.
All right, thank you. I'm calling a vote on the motion to postpone. By roll, Mr. Kalish. And I will be postponed, and no means we don't postpone, then we'll go back to the original resolution.
Carol,
No.
Murphy Lopez,
Aye.
Van Landuit,
Aye.
Steve, McKee,
Aye.
Brewer,
Aye.
Luck,
Aye.
Manning,
Aye.
Gotcho,
No.
Glassburner,
Sorry. Aye.
Rudersdorf,
Aye.
Prentice.
Aye, is that my name?
Yes, Linda, thank you.
Okay.
Turk,
Aye.
Cosgrove,
Aye.
Frank,
No.
Severson.
Can you state what I and no are for again?
S is to postpone, no is to not.
No.
Williamson,
No.
Tui,
Aye.
Nelson, Paul,
Aye.
and McGuire.
Aye.
Motion to postpone passes.
Okay, Mr. Van Landite had his hand up.
Well, I would make a motion that we have our next meeting, maybe next Tuesday, at 7 o'clock at the Phoenix Center, if that's available.
Okay, a motion was made. Do we have a second?
What is that date?
It's the 29th, March 29th.
Is that a motion to adjourn to that date?
Yes.
Could be.
What date is that again?
March 29th, Tuesday. 7 PM at Phoenix or wherever we can get a room.
Did you see the message from the MIS department?
No.
It's,
And where is the message? What does it say?
There is no MIS support that night, it says.
Okay.
Guarantee it without my staff being here. I
All right.
can't do it that night.
What
Okay.
about the 30th?
Do it the 30th. I cannot do it that night though.
Yeah.
What night can she?
I can the 30th. I cannot the 29th.
How about the 31st?
I need to go back and look.
Thursday.
Can you change that to the 30th, Lee?
I would do that or the 31st,
The
depending on
31st
Barb's schedule.
The 31st is hard, but I can check on that. I know I don't have Jason the 31st.
Yeah. Well, here we are on Wednesday, and I think if we were to do it Wednesday again, if it's okay with Marty, I'd go with the 30th then. So I changed my my motion to the 30th.
Did we have a second then adjourned and to the 30th at 7 PM? Manning. Okay. All those in favor of adjourning to the 30th at 7 PM signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no.
No.
One no. Do we need to take roll or does everyone agree that the ayes have it?
Ayes have it.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I just ask that some research get done on this issue of debating postponable, when motions to postpone are made? I have a book in front of me. I think we need to consult Robert's Rules of Order because I do believe motions to postpone are debatable and motions to table are not. And I think we need to get this sorted out because it causes a lot of confusion in our meetings.
No.